Hello and welcome to episode 71 of The Dive Down, a Magic the Gathering podcast for the casual spike, focused on the latest decks, trends, and strategies in Modern and Pioneer. My name is Stanislav here in Chicago, and with me on the line from Denver, Colorado, it's the one and only Shane Beeps.
Stanislav, it's a hot one, man. And I may have mentioned this in the past, but it's like 7 inches from the midday sun out here.
I haven't heard you say that in 2020 yet.
Well, because it's been chilly. No, it's warm. It's going to be like in the 80s. You know how I can tell I'm truly 40 is that the first thing I think about is, let's talk about how's the weather out there? How's it doing? How's your forecast?
Yeah.
Maybe that's what our other podcast should be. Like, we keep flirting with a movie podcast, a pizza podcast. Maybe it should just be weather talk.
That'll be awesome on a 1 week delay for editing. Amazing topical content.
We can workshop it in a bonus episode. Is that Dave Harbarger I hear? The Godfather?
It is. It's a tough day today. We're going to have a little send-off for something that's near and dear to my heart later on in this show.
Uh-oh.
So I want to observe a moment of silence. Great. We'll do that again later.
Did you actually turn your mic off for the moment of silence?
No.
On this week's episode, we break down a couple Modern challenges. There were 2 over the weekend, and we look at both of them. Then we'll dive into another installment of Sleeve Believe Heave, featuring our new friends, the Companions. Then hopefully we'll have some time at the end to wind down with a brief send-off to our beloved DCI numbers, 111 267 5445. I'll never forget you.
536 569. Goodbye.
411-398-879. Don't dox me.
But first, some housekeeping. Hello, welcome, and thank you to the newest patrons to join the Dive Down Nation. Shout out this week go to Chris G, Martin W, and Nyarko-san. Hello. Nice to have some new citizens. Also, big thanks to Robotini1, Zing, King Zeke. Yeah,
Zingkeek.
Not Zingkeek.
It's King Zeke. And Kilgore Trout 503 for their very nice reviews on Apple Podcasts. Also, Maynard updated their review. I didn't even know that was possible.
Did they make it worse or better?
They said even in a post-elk world, they still like us. So.
Oh, great.
Look, I also want to especially shout out Kilgore's parody on the full Cheers theme song intro. So it's like, making the way in the world each day takes everything you got. That's not what they said, but that's what the song was. So
I have to see this.
We should sing this.
Oh, wow.
Let's pull it up.
I think we can harmonize.
Hold on.
How many people who listen to this podcast have ever even seen Cheers?
Making your way in modern today takes everything you got. Getting a breakdown on PTQ sure would mean a lot.
Wouldn't you like to get a buy? Sometimes you want to go where everybody plays your game.
That's not the theme song, is it?
That is the theme song.
Man, I think Stan's just so off tune.
No, he's not.
I'm singing beautifully.
Rotating formats are so lame. Bum, bum, bum.
You want to be where you can see how the meta is going to change.
You want to be where everybody plays your game. Dun-dun-dun-dun-dun.
This is definitely getting cut.
Oh, yeah. 100%.
Are you afraid to get sued, Dave?
We do not have the performance rights to that.
That's parody.
It is parody.
That's Parody Act. If Weird Al can do it, so can we.
Yeah, that's right. You can find us and 2 Live Crew and the Supreme Court writers of the Cheers theme song.
I thought I sounded very good. It was Shane who clearly wasn't listening to himself.
You know what? I think I wasn't. I think I was listening for a different part of the theme song, so I apologize, Stan.
Maybe we can record a version where that's just the new theme to the show. Cameo.com, hire a real musician.
We could probably get the singer of the Cheers theme song on Cameo. So if you want to make us feel good about ourselves without going so far as to write a parody of an 80s sitcom theme song, head over to some kind of podcast rating area, iTunes, wherever you listen. Spotify, I think, has reviews, and tell us what you think. If you'd like to help support us, I don't think we mentioned that you can find the Dive Down at patreon.com/the Dive Down as well.
Yeah, I don't think we've ever mentioned that, actually.
I think we usually do.
People have just been Googling us.
Yeah.
Of course, if you'd like to support the show while playing a bit of Magic, especially right now when we're under quarantine, a lot of local game stores are closed, but not forgotten. You can use manatraders.com to rent cards for Magic Online. With promo code TheDiveDown, you can get 15% off your first 3 months of a Mana Trader subscription. That's manatraders.com. Promo code TheDiveDown. I'm going to keep talking because I wrote the breakdown. It's StanCast. There were 2 modern challenges this week, and I'm going to talk about both of them in an abridged format. We're going to run through them really quick and pretty much kick off our conversation about companions, which is the focus of the dive today. Assuming there are actually any copies of companions in any of these top 8s. I don't know yet.
Maybe one.
All right, so let's start with the more recent challenge that happened on April 27th, which was won by Oliver Ha playing Grixis Death Shadow.
It's Oliver Hart. You got a line break situation going on there in your spreadsheet.
Thanks. Well, now we got a line break in my deck column.
Yeah.
Well, Oliver Hart, thank you. I mean, I'm sorry. I mean, congratulations for winning the Modern Challenge with Grixis Death Shadow, running 3 Croxa.
Whew.
Yeah.
And their companion was Lurrus.
Yeah, Lurrus Death Shadow.
Weird.
So there's one. Lurrus watch.
Weird. I'm going to be talking about that deck later. Not the exact same build, but...
Oh, cool. I'm excited to hear what you think. It seems good.
Yeah.
Second place, KBR3 with Hardened Scales.
Ooh, it's back.
Featuring Lurrus and 4 copies of the Ozolith, which was a card we talked about on our Picks to Click episode.
Absolutely.
I'm very excited just to test out some Ozolith in even Pioneer Scales.
I didn't even see it being picked up in that deck.
Well, it's not yet, really. But I want to try it.
Cool. Innovate. In third place, we had Cohort on Boros Burn, featuring Lurrus. This deck also had Seal of Fire, which I think is just really cool Lurrus tech. It seems to be one of the go-to combos with this companion in particular. 2 damage every turn.
Yeah. You know what else it does?
Trigger prowess.
No, it kills your opponent's Lurrus. That's also why I think it's good.
Cool.
Yeah, I think it's kind of mirror tech, basically, for all these Lurrus mirror games that we're seeing.
Interesting. Fourth place, Gerardo94 on Grixis Delver, featuring Lurrus. Also had 4 Sprite Dragon. Personally, no Mystic Sanctuary in the main deck surprised me. Just because Delver plus Mystic Sanctuary, I feel, is like a really great little synergy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would love for Delver to be good. Again, it's this deck or something close to this deck has definitely been putting up results recently here and there. This is a deck that I considered playing for this week's Leave Believe Heave, and I did not. I opted to play Grixis Death Shadow instead. But maybe I'll go back and give us another shot. I thought that maybe it had already gotten out of fashion, but here it is, Gerardo94.
Fifth place, Joe True on Nivtalite, featuring Gigantha. Is it Yagantha? Is that a soft J?
Yagantha makes plenty sense in this. I mean, why not? Good card.
I have a hard time evaluating Nivtalite decks, but to all the Niv stands, we see you. Sixth place, Andrea94. A lot of 94s in the top 8.
Yeah, what's embarrassing is they were probably born in 1994.
Yeah, I was like, where were you in 94, Stan?
I was in kindergarten.
Oh, good.
Maybe in first grade. I don't remember, actually.
I was taking driver's ed. Perfect.
Andrea94, sixth place with Boros Burn featuring Lurrus. Kind of like a stock deck at this point. Week 2 of this version already feels normal.
So are we going to treat companions like guest rappers? It's like Burn featuring Lurrus.
Yeah.
Like Stews featuring Donald. Like,
I think any one of card in your sideboard, if it's a creature, it's your new companion.
Interesting.
Yeah, so even if it's not the actual companion.
Yeah.
It's going to be a lot of Wormcoil Engine and Thrag Tusks too, huh?
7th place, Lapse Legion, Undevoted Devastation, featuring Lurrus. Same infinite combo deck as before, but now it's got Mishra's Bauble.
Yeah, you have to imagine Laplace John is just sort of champing at the bit here when they can play the Devoted Druid deck with tons of recursion in Lurrus, just leverage that skill that they developed over months and months and months of playing this deck.
Is Bauble just the new Once Upon a Time in this deck?
I mean, it's just a way to get through your deck really quickly. It's like kind of a why not, right? And maybe it's not even that good. Maybe they're just testing it.
Hey, guess what? I have lots to say about this in the Sleeve, Believe, Heave area of this episode. But I will say it's card advantage. It's not card selection is the big thing here.
Yes.
And it is not free completely. So,
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I think it helps you more in the mid game than the early game, I guess is what I would say.
More on that later, perhaps. 8th place, Saka 93, so a little bit older than the 94 crew. On a Titan deck featuring Golos, the Tireless Pilgrim, as their companion.
It's not a legal companion, Stan.
What?
No.
Why would they run this card then?
Shane, he just laid out the rules for what we're calling companions
Well,
now.
I understand that, but it doesn't work that way.
So I actually don't know what to call this deck because it's not Scapeshift, though it has Valakut, and it's not an Amulet deck, but it does run Titan, and it also has Karn. So this is just a deck that can make mana, and it knows how to use it.
It makes mana and knows how to... I mean, it's probably a Golos combo deck because you can fetch up Golos with your Karn the Great Creator. So I'm sure there's a Golos combo element. There's the lock element of Karn. Certainly helpful. Because for some reason, Golos is an artifact creature. Why not?
Yeah.
He's a robot.
This is just Titan, right? Titan Karn, but I think you're right. It's a different take on it than we're used to seeing.
Cool. We'll just call it the Titan deck.
Yeah.
9th place, this is an honorable mention to Panza. Albert DK won the 9th place seat with Obosh Panza. No land destruction in the 75, but 6 Blood Moon effects between the main deck and the sideboard.
Just a ton of creatures in this deck.
Yeah, a lot of creatures.
Yeah. 30 creatures. Man, I will say Pillage was one of the best turn 3 plays, and it's interesting to see them decide they don't need it. Huh.
I'd also like to attract your attention to the 25th place Obosh Panza deck is another honorable mention because this one has a lot going on. It has 4 Luca, Coppercoat Outcast in the main deck, plus 1 Emrakul, 4 Goblin Rabblemaster, 3 Planebound Accomplice, which is a card I will read in a second, and 3 Oath of Nissa. It also has like several even CMC spells in the sideboard, so basically taking off the Obosh plan, maybe post-board, depending on the power of those sideboard cards, because they're playing like Weather the Storm and Collector Oof, and those are pretty good cards in like regular Panza. So maybe you don't necessarily need the Obosh in every matchup. All right, so really quick, what this combo's doing, it's so silly, I want to talk about it. Because it's a Luca Coppercoat combo. You use Planebound Accomplice, a Modern Horizons card. It's just a 3 mana 1/3 that says, pay a red mana, put a Planeswalker card from your hand onto the battlefield, sack it at the beginning of the next end step. And then Luca has this ability that's -2, exile a target creature you control, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature card with higher CMC. Put that on the battlefield and the rest on the bottom of your library. I think the ceiling here is you cheat out Luca and you cheat out maybe a turn 3 Emrakul.
Wow. That is very funny.
I would.
Hey, Didn't I tell you? Do you remember me saying during the Modern Horizons spoiler episode that I thought Planebound Accomplice eventually would have some kind of weird combo come up?
I was with you, man.
Yeah.
Except we thought it would be Saheeli Rai.
I did think it would be Saheeli, but also we had a lot of Saheeli on the mind then.
True.
Saheeli's always on my mind.
So that was a deck by 12 days. Let's look at I guess this is the Saturday Modern Challenge on April 26th.
Great.
Similar but different. First place, Son of Nothing on Temur Euroza featuring Urion, the companion that makes you run a 60-card main deck.
80 card.
Thank you, 80-card main deck.
Or more. Go big.
At least 80. Why stop there? So this is an Emery and Urza shenanigan deck, plus Uro and Icefang, because they're maybe the two best blue-green creatures in Modern. So this is control value combo. Get some ETBs. Play Magic. Dave is shaking his head in disbelief. Not my Magic the Gathering.
I don't ever want to play this deck or against it.
I can't believe, with all the things that Companions are doing, the fact that they're making 80 card decks very competitively viable is just, it's blowing my mind.
You know what I call that? Upside.
Yeah. It's so viable, in fact, that the same-ish deck list is also in second place in this tournament.
Yep.
Oh, Lord.
Yorion, Urza, Agenza.
So for people who don't know the text of every companion, so what is Yorion? Yorion gives you the benefit of exiling any number of other non-land permanents you own and control, return them to the battlefield at the beginning of the next end step. So you get a single ETB of Yorion, and you can blink a whole bunch of stuff that you have, which does what? Like it can draw a card off your Icefang Quaddles. You get your Uro ETBs. You get your Urza ETBs. That's all well and good. Arkham's Astrolabe, sure.
Yeah, I think that's a big one.
Can you reset your EE? No, you can't. That's a casting cost. So,
can I tell you what else Yorion gives you?
Please.
It just gives you a Sarah Angel that you can cast whenever you want. Even just a 4/5 flyer in a deck that's kind of controlling.
Sure.
I've honestly lost to that just because somebody controlled the board, ran me out of cards, and then they cast their companion and just rode a 4/5 flyer to victory. So
yeah.
The trigger is important, but also I think that certainty of knowing that you have a finisher in your hand whenever you want for a deck that's supposed to kind of outlast somebody is totally worth it.
That makes sense.
Yeah, even Abundant Growth, another 1-mana card that draws you a card. So those are the first two places, Son of Nothing and Festifon on Yorion decks. In third place, Black Cat 1922. That's an old Magic player.
Yeah, so we thought we were the experienced ones.
On Boros Burn with Lurrus.
Got a 92-year-old. 88-year-old?
I think it's a 98-year-old
98?
Shane.
Yeah, that's what I meant. 98. Let's do some math.
Yeah.
Let's do some math. In the fourth place deck, 4-color control, featuring Lurrus. Only main deck creatures are Icefang Coatl and Snapcaster Mage, and the rest are like 19 instants and sorceries and Wrenn and 6. Pile of good Modern cards.
Thanks.
Fifth place, Amulet Titan, no companion.
Featuring Pyroclasm. That's my companion.
Maybe their companion is the sixth place Amulet Titan deck. Also had no companion.
They're just buds, two of them together.
Seventh place, Panza featuring Obosh. Unlike the previous ninth place deck we mentioned in the last Modern Challenge, this one has no even CMC cards, but it does run 4 Life Goes On in the sideboard, which, like, when I saw that, it was just a little light bulb went off because of all the burn. Seems like a great card to run right now.
Mm-hmm. This one, worth mentioning, also does not have pillage.
Yeah, no pillage.
We're over it.
I guess.
Eighth place, Boros Burn, featuring Lurrus. Pretty interesting strategy. Oh, no, it's just Lurrus Burn. Never mind. Shout out to the 11th place Amulet Titan player by the name of Sodak.
Never heard of him.
It's really weird when, like, a player who runs a single deck and it becomes like so synonymous with who they are as a competitor picks something totally, totally different. Because Sodok is the dredge person and they have nothing to do with Amulet Titan. Another familiar face in 12th place was Spider Space, running a Teamer grinding breach deck featuring Lurrus.
Seems pretty good in that shell. Just bring back all your permanents.
Yeah, it's got 4 Kinnan in the main deck, plus playsets of Goblin Engineer, Grinding Station, Underworld Breach, and Mox Amber. This is a deck I'm not smart enough to understand, but I think it involves a lot of clicking.
Isn't it weird that the companion decks we've seen so far are essentially just like ultra fair decks, where it's like, hey, let's get some additional value off our companions, and like there's so many options for doing some potentially busted stuff with like these breach style decks.
Yeah.
Yeah, but why complicate things when you can just burn them out? Another honorable mention to the 22nd place finisher, Musasabi, playing green-white oops all combos featuring Zirda. I'm just mentioning it because that's one of the decks I talk about today in the dive down.
What are the decks? You got multiple?
Well, I kind of looked at a couple different iterations of this green-white Zirda deck.
Oh, man. I'm hyped.
Last but not least, in 23rd place, Merfolk, featuring Lurrus.
Yep.
And 4 main deck Chalice of the Void.
Yikes.
Which I think seems great against Lurrus.
Yeah.
Why not?
You just gave away all of the leads to my story for my Lurrus thing.
You could put it in Merfolk. You can put it in Burn.
You can put it in Jund. You can put it in Shadow. You can put it in Grinding Station combo.
Who could have predicted this?
Dave, I hope you explain why Orzhov hybrid mana turned out to be the most splashable color of mana ever.
Because you can splash any color in Modern, especially when it's hybrid.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Fit it in your deck. Doesn't matter. Boy.
So it's the Lurrus world. We're just living in it now, right?
Yes.
Apparently.
I mean, did we count how many of these top 8s were Lurrus decks?
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 out of
9 out of 16? Yeah.
Yeah.
More than 50%.
Seems okay. That's
a lower percentage than Lurrus decks that I faced in the leagues that I've done this week.
Interesting.
I faced 70% Lurrus decks.
But who's counting, Dave?
Yeah, not me.
I do think it is amazing how many different decks she improves. Like the fact that she's going in Merfolk and Burn and Grinding Breach. It's like if you have a deck and you want to tighten the screws, just throw 4 cards in the main that draw you cards and 1 sideboard slot, and you have a stew going.
Yeah. I mean, it's really shocking. I mean, I think everybody knew that the card was going to be available for a lot of people to use, and in a lot of in this format where everything has constant downward pressure on converted mana costs, and it's a large format, so you have a lot of options. It just turns out it's worth it to bend your deck to fit this value engine in it. Sort of doesn't matter if you have only 8 creatures or if you have 22 creatures that you can replay with it. Lurrus is still worth the time and the effort.
I do think, though, if Burn gets too popular specifically, and it does seem like Lurrus Burn is particularly present in these results, that's the type of deck that you can just hate out. You know, like there's so many spells that gain you life that don't have a ton of downside if they're in your sideboard.
Yeah.
Or, you know, can at least be part of your plan.
Yeah, and everybody has a plan around for Burn anyway, right? Where it's like whether you're playing Dragon's Claw or maybe you're playing Core Firewalker, or maybe you're playing Collective Brutality. There are a lot of sideboard cards that people just have against Burn.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, but Mike Tyson also said everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face, and that's what Burn's doing to you. So,
yeah, I gotta admit, I don't think it's that good. I played against it a bunch over the week, and I think it's like fine, but I think there's better Lurrus decks out there. And I'm going to talk about it in the dive down.
Wow, Dave. Saying Burn, not that good. So brave.
How many times do you think Dave's just going to lead those breadcrumbs to him talking about Lurrus in the dive down?
It's called a tease in the industry.
If you suggest that Delver is better than Burn, we'll have a really interesting podcast. I also think it's kind of amazing that Titan stands out as one of these holdout strategies from pre-companion Modern, where it just doesn't need it, or maybe doesn't want any companions, maybe both.
It seems like from this that it's one of the only tier decks that does not twist itself to get a companion. At least in the results that you shared with us, the Titan decks are the only ones that don't have a companion. I mean, I think part of it is that the deck is such a fine-tuned kind of engine that they're not able to shift their strategy over into fitting one of the any of the companions things.
Yeah.
Requirements, I guess is the word I should have said. But
No, the things.
yeah.
And I do think it's really cool that next to Lurrus, Yorion was, I think, the second most popular companion across these two challenges. And I don't think that was the card that I was expecting to maybe be like among the best companions.
Yeah.
I'm a little bit surprised to see no Zirda stuff, really, because I was seeing some interesting combo strategies featuring Zirda, but maybe it's just not quite there. Maybe it's more cute than good. But I definitely did see our friend Everett on his stream, Aspiring Spike. He was doing some stuff.
Yeah, I think Zirda's time will come, Shane.
It's going to come in about an hour when Stan gets to talk about it.
I had a bunch of takeaways from these results, but then it turned out that it's all stuff that Dave was going to say during Sleep, Believe, Heave. So maybe we can just leave it at that, get people pumped for after the break.
Yeah, we're talking about companions this week. Listen in for what we have to say about them.
Stan, let me do the fade out music, okay? Making your way in Modern today takes everything you've got.
And we're back.
I really wish we had the Cheers like break-in music, you know, like when they come back from a commercial break and it's like bah, 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 bah.
So companions, heard of them? They're new. And they're this class of cards. There's 10 of them, one for each guild, but not really because they're hybrid mana.
You got your count finally right, Stan.
So I thought it was 7. Then Shane's like, it's 9, Stan, get it together.
Come on, Stan.
And then Dave chimes in, guys, are you joking?
Are you just kidding around? Well, Dimir is a secret guild that everybody's supposed to pretend doesn't exist. Don't forget about that.
Little inside joke from the admin channel. Right, companions. They're the talk of the town. And frankly, I don't know why. I don't think they're that big of a deal. None of the decks are playing them unless... Oh, no, I'm looking at old results. All the decks are playing companions now, except Titan and Dredge. And everyone is kind of either upset. Maybe some people are not as upset, but however you feel, they are here for now. And if you're playing Magic, there's a very strong chance that you're going to be facing off against them, especially in the more competitive queues of any format.
Yeah, and the thing that's interesting, at least I think, is that they've led to some kind of maybe forced innovation, or maybe gave some decks a chance to kind of be looked at again. So we have some stuff to look at today in the dive down section where each of us look at some decks. Some of them are evolutions of decks that already exist. Some of them are decks that are kind of new decks or revitalized decks. And some of them are decks that were maybe a lower tier that are kind of being pushed up now.
And then I think toward the end of this conversation, we'll kind of revisit the concept of companions and kind of weigh in on how we feel about them. Because it's been a week. It's been a big week.
Yeah.
I played a lot of leagues, guys. I saw a lot of different companions. Almost all of them. I should keep a bingo sheet.
Wow, definitely.
Just 10 squares. Or 7.
I'm no graphic designer. I don't know how to arrange that.
In a grid.
All right, Dave, you're going to kick us off because you played the coolest companion.
Is it the coolest one? Is it
Cat Mob?
Is the one that everybody plays the coolest one? I didn't play the indie one.
No, that was me, wasn't it?
Yeah, a little bit. I played, all right, we're going to start with a banger. So I played a deck this week with Lurrus of the Dream Den. As I mentioned earlier, that deck was Grixis Death Shadow with Lurrus, was the one that I spent the most time with. So who doesn't know Lurrus by now at this point? If you've been playing Magic lately, you're either playing it or you're playing against it. I don't think I need to read it, but I'm going to anyway. just so everybody remembers. All right, Lurrus is 1 generic and 2 hybrid white-black mana. It's a legendary creature, Cat Nightmare. It's a 3/2. Its companion ability is each permanent card in your starting deck has a converted mana cost 2 or less. It has lifelink, and then it says during each of your turns, you may cast 1 permanent spell with converted mana cost 2 or less from your graveyard. All right. How everywhere is it? Well, we just took a look at it. Stan mentioned the modern challenges that he looked at. Like we said, it was in 9 of the top 16 decks. I played against it 70% of the time this week when I was playing league matches.
Humble brag.
Yeah, right. I played against it a whole 70% of the time. Awesome. I think that one thing that's interesting is that we knew we wanted to talk about Lurrus this week. Someone was going to play Lurrus decks. And the pervasiveness of it actually made it a little bit hard, right? Because it's in every deck, like we just talked about. There's aggro Lurrus builds. There's mid-range Lurrus builds like Jund. The aggro builds are like Prowess and Burn. There's control ones that are kind of like, hey, I'm playing Dimir Control Mill where I only have 4 creatures, but I have Lurrus in my sideboard.
Combo.
Yeah, there's combo, which I hadn't...
That grinding breach deck. Yeah.
I hadn't seen until that. So it's like, it goes in literally every style of deck. As Stan mentioned, I had the fortune to play against the Merfolk Lurrus deck as well. And guess what? That worked too.
And it's not just in Modern. Like, I played a Pioneer deck this week, and I faced up against Lurrus probably 60% of the time. You don't need just the CMCs of Pioneer, while not as low across the board as Modern. Still plenty of decks can run CMC 2 or lower permanents.
So instead of trying something too new, I thought I would try one of the less buzzed about lists with Lurrus. Now, it turns out it won one of the Modern challenges, which I didn't realize until a couple hours ago. But it's a deck that I like playing a lot. So I wanted to see if Lurrus made just kind of a good Modern deck better. And so that's why I ended up playing Grixis Death Shadow. The other thing that I want to do is that there's actually a couple of other Ikoria cards in the Grixis Death Shadow deck. I got a deck list from Michael Rapp from his Twitter feed. We had him on as a guest on the show a little bit ago. Noted Death Shadow scientist. I made one little tweak to it. So it's not the same list as was in the challenge that had Kroxa in it. The list that I was playing had three Ikoria cards in it, like I mentioned. It had Lurrus as the companion. It had Sprite Dragon. And it had Footfall Craters in it. So let's talk a little bit about each of the cards. So Lurrus itself. Guys, what's good about Lurrus?
It's weird how getting any 2 CMC or lower permanent back from your graveyard can do valuable things for you.
Yeah. I mean, the number one thing that everybody knows is that Grixis Death Shadow is already a Mishra's Bauble deck. And Lurrus goes great with Mishra's Bauble, so much so that many, many decks are now playing Mishra's Bauble with Lurrus, including Burn and all those other decks that we talked about a moment ago. Because what it does is it makes a little bit of a kind of like a Howling Mine, where you get to draw an extra card every turn once you have Lurrus up and Bauble going.
It's me, Lurrus.
One of the coolest things about drawing a card every turn off of Bauble is that it usually happens during the opponent's turn, so you don't get got by something like Narset Parter the Veils.
Oh, that's a great point too. Yeah, you only draw one card off of it. I will say one of the best things to do, by the way, is to drop a Bauble after you've played a Lurrus, or crack a Bauble, play Lurrus, and then crack a Bauble again, because all of a sudden it's like a 0 CMC divination, which is kind of amazing too.
Yeah, sounds okay.
Yeah, you get them all on your opponent's turn. That's true. The other thing that, of course, Lurrus does in this particular deck is that it lets you bring back your creatures, lets you bring back Death Shadow most notably, which is nice because sometimes you end up in these situations where, in the old Grixis list where you would be playing Kolaghan's Command to try to recur a Death Shadow on the second half of a Kolaghan's Command. This is way better. You get a creature, you play it for 1 mana, you move along your merry way, so that you don't have to be quite so precious with losing your Death Shadows in the middle of the game. Yeah, your Death Shadow 13/13 avatar moving along on its merry way.
Yeah, you thought Unearth was good.
I do think Unearth is good right now.
Oh, yeah.
More on that later.
Oh, you mean copies 3, 2, and 4 of Lurrus?
Yes, exactly.
That's how I count too.
In that order?
Yep. Is that a Russian thing?
You guys, I forgot what numbers were for a second.
Well, good thing you're a writer and not a mathematician.
Thank you.
All right. The second card that I got to test in this deck was Sprite Dragon, which is that cute little blue-red spell. It costs a blue and a red. And it's a flying haste 1/1 that says whenever you cast a non-creature spell on it, put a +1/+1 counter on Sprite Dragon.
Huh.
Yeah. There's some fun stuff going on there.
Wait a second. Are you telling me that Mishra's Bauble triggers Sprite Dragon?
It does. You know what? It didn't come up as much as you might think it did, but it definitely does. So that's a great 0 mana way to potentially buff your Sprite Dragon. The card that actually came up a lot with this was this deck also includes 2 copies of Dreadhorde Arcanist, which is actually super fantastic in a shadow deck that is filled with a bunch of proactive spells like Hand Disruption, Lightning Bolt, even Opt. You know, this deck is kind of cut down on any other kind of counter magic. It just has, I mean, just having Stubborn Denial is pretty normal for Death Shadow, but this one is got heavy on Lightning Bolt, light on Fatal Push in order to let you be able to recur it with Dreadhorde Arcanist. I mean, the thing that's interesting here, too, with Sprite Dragon is that it lets you, you have to get rid of the higher CMC threats in this deck in order to run Lurrus. And so having something that's two mana cost that can grow really big is really good and does a reasonable kind of impression of a secondary threat to Death Shadow. Together, Dreadhorde Arcanist and Sprite Dragon let these 2 cards lead to a lot of double or triple spell turns where you're kind of like holding your last piece of removal and then you get through your Sprite Dragon instead because someone's trying to kill your Lurrus instead. So Sprite Dragon gives you a little bit of aggro boost, also gives you a way to make a big threat later in the game, and is pretty sweet occasionally with Temur Battle Rage. The final card that I tried was Footfall Crater, which is a 1 red enchantment. It's an enchant land, and it says enchanted land has tap, target creature gains trample and haste until end of turn, and it has cycling 1. I ran this card as a 1-of. I thought that this was a pretty good card to just have in the 75 as a way to give your Death Shadow a chance to become a hasty monster out of the graveyard if you have Lurrus online. So you can pitch this early on to Lurrus, to the cycling, or sorry, not to Lurrus, to the cycling trigger, bring it back later if you want it. You can bring back a Death Shadow later, all kinds of different things. But it was kind of a fun way to surprise people by all of a sudden dropping a giant, hasty, trampling threat. Last card that's in this deck that is not a new card, it's an old card, but is way, way, way more powerful now, is Unearth, which we were just talking about a moment ago. So it adds some extra recursion to the deck. The list that I was playing had 2 Unearths in it. And I just want to say, when I was saying earlier that I wonder about how good burn with Lurrus really is, this is the reason why. Is because I really feel like any deck that is playing Lurrus in Modern right now, I feel like the best ones are the ones that can bring it back from the graveyard to be able to go at it again.
Yeah.
Somehow. And so you don't really get a chance to do that in the burn decks. I also tried Lurrus Prowess and felt like it was kind of middling too, especially when I would kill someone's Lurrus and they would bring it back and they would kill my Lurrus and then my whole game plan was kind of just shot.
One of the things that I found weird about this build is that it cuts down on Thought Scour and instead running, Serum Visions and Sleight of Hand.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's worth talking about. So Thought Scour hasn't been run in Death Shadow for a long time. And I think it's mostly because you just want to be able to dig 3 cards and have some selection, right? So being able to set up your future hands, I think is a little bit better in Death Shadow than doing the Thought Scour thing. But maybe it's something to try out again with Lurrus. I do think there's kind of a tension here where, being able to, how much do you want to twist your deck to have it play off of synergy with Lurrus, right? A lot of what what Serum Vision is there for is to help you make sure that you get enough land when you have like a land light hand, or get rid of land if you don't want land. And so I think that selection is really important instead of the sort of just like pure optionality that Thought Scour can bring.
That makes sense. considering it's only running 18 lands and it no longer has Street Wraith,
Yeah.
I think I can see why you'd have to make that trade-off. I would feel like Thoughtscour would still work well with Dreadhorde Arcanist as well as like the Unearths, but you only have 2 Unearth as well.
Yeah. It's a good point with Dreadhorde Arcanist because there you can always draw a card off of it at least, but you can also always draw a card off of Serum Visions if you want to. So I actually had a couple of times I would go, Dreadhorde Arcanist is out, play a Serum Visions, attack with Dreadhorde Arcanist, Serum Visions again. It's good like that for sure. So one thing that's really interesting about this list, and even the list that won the challenge, is that it was, a lot of sacred cows have been kind of slaughtered here. Like, I think people thought there's no way that Death Shadow can run a creature with lifelink, which I think pretty easily you sidestep, and it's actually pretty useful sometimes to have access to bringing your life total back up, even if your shadows get smaller. Mm-hmm. The other thing is that it doesn't run Street Wraith, so you can't really turbo out a giant Death Shadow in the first couple of turns anymore when you get those really wild hands where all of a sudden you cut down you do 10 damage to yourself or 11 damage to yourself in the first couple of turns and drop a giant shadow.
Yeah, even Michael Rapp, like when Lurrus was spoiled, I follow him on Twitter and he was saying something about it's weird to have to cut Street Wraith from the deck to the point that he didn't think Lurrus was necessarily like the right shell for Death Shadow because Street Wraith was so vital to the strategy historically.
Yeah. And I think what it shows is just that Bauble is so powered up right now that it's better to just have that. I think the other thing that's interesting, speaking of him, and we'll bring him on for another interview, but he had a tweet that came out a couple of days later. He dropped a tweet that said,
breaking news.
He felt like, how did he state it? He basically said that he thought that Death Shadow was the best threat in a Lurrus deck because it was the right mana cost, not that Lurrus was good in Death Shadow decks. And so it's this weird kind of like flipping of the script where he's kind of saying if you want to play tempo Lurrus, he thinks that Death Shadow is better than Delver, is what I think he's kind of getting at. And I've seen a number of different people kind of say that. It's part of the reason I tested this deck over Delver was because there were a lot of people who were like, no, don't play Delver. Also, I like Death Shadow and kind of knew how to pilot it already.
Hey, don't you also like Delver though?
I've wanted to. The only thing I've ever liked Delver in is Pauper.
Huh.
I've never played Legacy, so it is what it is. So I did some practice matches, and I got in one league with this deck. I went 3-2 playing against Lurrus Burn 3 times, Infect once, and Jund with Lurrus just in the main deck. I lost to Burn once and Infect once. I felt like both of those matches were actually super close and probably came down to a single misplay to have me lose them. So I felt like Death Shadow was in all of these matches. The thing that actually saved me the most in a Burn heavy meta was having access to one lifelink guy in the sideboard and having, or in the, in my companion, and also having an Unearth there to bring it back.
So you just like sort of like intelligently buffer it. Like you get a big enough body that it can block, but doesn't put you. It keeps you out of lethal range from like top deck burn spells or. And
of course, like with Burn, when you're playing in Death Shadow, you get a lot better in games 2 and game 3 because you bring in 3 Cobrews, and that helps a ton as well because you can 3 for 1 them. You discard your cards, but you get so far ahead on mana there that it helps a lot. By having them discard a card, killing a creature, and also nugging them and gaining some life, all of those things help you a ton. So it's that combination in games 2 and 3 that were really huge. But I felt like the deck was really capable right now. I just don't know if really like the Shadow Plan is the right way to go for the best Lurrus deck. And I kind of think that that's what some of Modern is going to be right now. Is like, what's the best Lurrus deck? Is it combo Lurrus? I mean, maybe there's one in each archetype, right? Where we have like, what's the best tempo deck and what's the best aggro deck and what's the best, but there's all these different Lurrus builds. And I'm not sure if this one is really the final form of this. Definitely the deck that we looked at in the Modern Challenge that was running Kroxa and Snapcaster Mage, that's a very different plan from the deck that I was playing that had Dreadhorde Arcanist and Sprite Dragon, right? My deck's a bit more aggressive. I think their deck's a little bit more mid-rangey. It's possible that you want to be a little bit more mid-rangey. I thought it was still fun to play, and I think if you are a Shadow person, you should you could definitely keep playing some version of Death Shadow with Lurrus in this meta and compete. So I think if you are worried about that, you shouldn't be. I think one thing that's also super weird about Lurrus right now is that Lurrus is just going in decks that already exist. And in fact, lots of the companions are just going in decks that already exist. But in particular, all of these are just getting added into different things. So it's a little bit more like you need a plan against Lurrus and you need to figure out how to use your Lurrus the best. But it's not really... I don't think ultimately there's only going to be one Lurrus deck in Modern. I think there's going to be tons and tons.
Or none.
Or, well, none. If it becomes tons and tons, then it will be none. I think you're right about that. So if you like Shadow, play it. This deck is kind of a believe for me. I don't think it's like something I'm going to force myself to go back to. I'm not sure if it's like far and away the best deck in the format or anything like that, but I would play it again. I also think Sprite Dragon is decent to okay. It's not amazing, but I think it's pretty good. If you want to hear like individual other cards that are playable here.
So here's a question. Traditionally, Grixis Shadow could like sometimes present like a virtual kill on turn 3, right? Like it would just be so far ahead. Maybe it didn't actually have the win, but like if opponent can't answer a turn 2 Gurmag Angler, you just kind of run away with the game. Do you feel like this deck is a slowed down version of that? If it's still a tempo strategy, is it just playing like a little bit slower because it's counting on like fewer big creatures that you can't have like a massive virtual threat on turn 2 or 3?
Yeah, it's definitely a little slower than that. I think it's still on the quicker side, but I don't think it's like a virtual kill on turn 3 kind of thing at all.
Dave, you've talked a little bit about this already, but what did you think was the most dramatic shift in your mindset you had to have playing with Lurrus versus playing the different styles of this deck, whether that's, you know, the more aggressive Jund style or the more grindy Grixis style? Like, were you changing the way you approached matchups? Were you just getting just incidental value off the Lurrus?
I think it was more the incidental value off the Lurrus was an engine you want to try to pick up to kind of go into the mid game. So you had a little bit more kind of mid game ability, I think, here in the main board, whereas sometimes out of the side, you didn't get like Kolaghan's command until you went to the sideboard in the way that Grixis Shadow was kind of shaping up before. I also think that I was a little less precious with my threats in this deck because I knew that Lurrus would be able to get them back if I really got in a bind. So if I got out a threat early and then they killed it, and then I switched over to the Lurrus plan where I could play my threats back out, that was a good kind of escape plan. Whereas sometimes you get a little scared in Death Shadow where you're kind of like, well, I need to hold a threat in my hand, or I need to wait until I have a stubborn denial, something like that. I didn't really worry about it when I was playing this build quite as much.
Yeah, so Stan and other people, of course, routinely describe this as kind of a protect the queen type strategy, but it sounds like you don't need to worry about that nearly as often.
It just has a new queen. The new queen is Lurrus. Protect that queen. Death Shadow is no longer the queen that has to be protected. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you want to keep Lurrus on the board as long as possible.
Yep.
And you protect her, I think, in a slightly different way. Like, Lurrus doesn't turn on your stubborn denial.
Right. That is a problem with it. And neither does Sprite Dragon until you put some work into it. So that actually is a little bit of an awkwardness in the deck that I played with for sure. I actually felt like stubborn denial was kind of like average-ish in this build. But yeah, little grimace on my face as I say that. But I mean, it's still kind of the best, the best one mana counterspell that's around. So anyway, as we kind of come out of this deck, it's a believe. I also played Lurrus Prowess just as like a little hat tip to some of our other decks that we love on the show, or I love on the show. And I'm not going to say much about it other than I didn't like it that much, and I don't like Abbot of Carol Keep, and I don't think it's a great Lurrus deck in my mind. But we'll see. Maybe I need some more reps.
Don't feel bad, Dave. I never liked Abbot of Carol Keep.
Yeah. So before we park Lurrus, I wanted to talk about some tips about how to play Lurrus and how to play against it. So I'd love for you guys to join in because I know everybody's gotten a lot of reps against Lurrus. So the first thing I would say with Lurrus is that The number one thing to make sure you do is that you get value off of the static the turn you play it. So it's tough to play it as a 3 CMC spell unless you have a bauble to bring back, because then you will get an extra card out of it. What do you guys think about that?
Makes sense.
Yeah, it takes me back to like all the stuff about, Young Pyromancer, about Monastery Mentor. You want to be able to get a token out of it to get at least some value in the face of a removal spell.
Yeah. So what goes hand in hand with that is make sure you play it when you have enough mana to do something with it.
You don't always need the mana, though.
Yeah, you don't always need it. So just make sure you're paying attention. The thing that goes hand in hand with that, I think a little bit, is I think you need to think a couple of turns ahead with Lurrus. I mean, that's all of Magic, right? But make sure that you, A, don't forget that you have a companion, which I think we've all done a couple of times. But B, make sure you're thinking ahead about what you want to have in the graveyard and what you want to be able to play out the turn that you want to bring Lurrus into play, because that'll help you decide maybe a creature that you chump block or chump attack with, maybe when you fire off your Seal of Fire, maybe when you play out your bauble or whatever. Just make sure you're planning ahead for what card you want to have in the graveyard for when Lurrus does come out, because there are some decisions associated with that. Because what you don't want to have happen is that you get to the end of your hand and you have a great board built out. You don't really have a reason to play Lurrus, but it's the only thing you can play. And so you kind of miss a turn of mana utilization.
So it sounds like you're playing to set up a Lurrus play.
Yes.
Essentially. Whether that's on turn 3 or 4, or maybe later in the game.
Yeah, depending on what deck you're on.
Did you have like a ceiling in mind? Like, this is the best thing that I have ever done with the Lurrus?
I mean, the best thing I think in this particular deck is bringing back a giant Death Shadow. I think it's pretty much what you want to do. Although really the best thing in this deck, and maybe the best thing in all of the decks, might be just getting extra bauble activations on it, because then you're just getting a card. I mean, think of it this way. If you play a Lurrus and manage to draw a card off of it with a bauble, and your opponent does not have a companion, so you're playing against Titan, it's like a 3-for-1. Because you had an extra card, they used a removal spell on it, so it's 0-for-1, and you drew another card off of it, so it's an 0-for-2, which is like kind of wild.
One thing I'm curious about, Dave, in that vein, is you can't run Ranger Captain of Eos anymore in this type of deck, and you played some Mardu Shadow back when that was a thing. How would you compare the Lurrus version of this sort of grindier strategy to the grind that Ranger Captain, Unearth, Mardu Shadow brings you?
I mean, it's been a long time since I played Mardu Shadow. I think that this one has the ability to be more aggro than the Mardu one did. Although the Mardu deck had the ability to kind of combo you out with Hex Parasite, where you could kind of get your stuff down, fetch up Hex Parasite, and then drain yourself of a ton of life and attack with a giant a shadow. So I think that this is lower on the grind scale than Mardu and a little faster. But you get counter spells in this one, so you can't really. It was harder to protect your stuff in the other deck.
And does it feel like efficient, or does it feel pretty grindy? Like you said, it didn't feel ridiculously grindy.
No, I think it feels pretty efficient still. I mean, it feels like you're serum visioning into threats. You're setting yourself up for what you need. You hold up a lightning bolt. I had a game where I got to like Thoughtseize someone 3 times off of Dreadhorde Arcanist, Thoughtseize, Dreadhorde Arcanist. Like, it was kind of like I did it a bunch of times to people. So I just picked their hand apart and go for it. I think Dreadhorde Arcanist helps with that kind of stuff a bit too.
That to me almost sounds like your replacement for Street Wraith, where although you may be losing a little bit of that churn, you still have a killer tool to aggressively like chip away at your own life total while putting yourself ahead of your opponent.
Yeah, I mean, I think the key there is more just getting extra value out of your discard spells. Which is huge sometimes when you get to take both threats that someone has or both removal spells or something. Last tip, I think, for playing with Lurrus is that I think it's best in the decks that can recur it. We kind of hinted towards this earlier when we talked about Unearth. We hinted to it in the challenge. I really feel like ultimately the decks that can play Lurrus multiple times are going to be very strong because everybody is going to be packing instant speed removal to kill Lurrus. And they should be. You have to. And so that brings me up to the tips that I had for playing against it, which is you got to kill it or counter it as fast as possible. Or else you're going to fall so far behind on card advantage that you're just not going to be able to come back. And so, for example, I think that, the switch in Grixis Death Shadow was that it was running for Fatal Push. It's now running for Lightning Bolt. It's more proactive with Dreadhorde Arcanist to be able to bolt somebody twice potentially and kind of get things going. But also it kills Lurrus at instant speed. In decks that are red, they're running Seal of Fire with their Lurrus so that they can bring it back over and over again to kill opponents' Lurruses. And of course, maybe you're burning people too, but I really think it's there to just be a recursive removal engine more than anything else, specifically to kill Lurrus. So you got to always be thinking about that particular aspect of it and probably saving removal for it, unfortunately.
Do you think it's time to start playing more Stony Silence effects to shut off Bobble?
That seems bad to me as an option, just because there are some decks that don't care that much. I think if the only triggers you're going to stop somebody from getting are Bobble triggers with Stony Silence, I would say it's not worth it to you to bring it in, because they'll just use it to get back a different permanent instead. Now, if you're playing against a deck that only has Bobbles and a low creature count, so the permanents, it's kind of like a control deck, you're probably also still bad because they're probably going to kill you with Snapcaster Mage, or something like that. I think Graveyard Hate's a lot more effective against Lurrus, and that's probably what I would look to do instead of kind of something like Stony Silence. I think that's secondary to just killing it, but I think it's possible that a lot of decks are going to start looking at a combination of instant speed removal and surgical extraction again as the way to do this, because you can get rid of a Bobble if you can't kill Lurrus or whatever. So, not main deck surgical, by the way. I'm not advocating that.
You can't stop me.
Anyway, Grixis Death Shadow with Lurrus, believe.
Sweet.
Wow, very tempered take. Shane, tell me you're a little bit more excited about your companion, your new best friend, who you have to love.
Okay. Well, I do love Obosh. It's like my favorite weird millipede from space looking thing. So I explored.
We should mention that you explored Pioneer.
Yes. Yeah.
This is the only Pioneer content on this episode. Keep in mind, everybody. Yeah.
Yeah. You know me. Yeah. I knew that these gents were going to run with some modern, so I wanted to explore the Pioneer domain since we profess to be a modern Pioneer podcast. And I do enjoy Pioneer. It's fun. Right now I'm playing Pioneer and Modern for the first time in a while, like simultaneously. We've got a friendly league going with the super secret Slack server and the citizens of the Dive Down Nation. So I'm running a companion there in Modern Humans, because why not? You can. So run it.
Which one are you running in Modern Humans?
That 5-color one.
Yaganta?
Like the one that, like it taps. It's just a free creature. So if it's free, it's me. In the words of Brian Gottlieb.
Giganta?
Yeah, Yaganta.
By the way, I played against Storm running that.
Yeah, why not? Just because you can.
What?
Piloted by the Pensword. He and I got matched up the other day in a league, and yeah, he was playing Storm with Gigantha.
There's going to be so many mentions of previous Dive Down guests on this episode.
Yeah.
We're not done yet.
So I did play Pioneer, and I played the latest iteration of Gruul Aggro. I came across this deck, I think everyone did, because Yama Killer, who's a very well-known and high-quality streamer, a.k.a. Gull Schlesinger, he was actually our first guest on this podcast, and since he was the first, we're going to keep running that into the ground. He ran this deck in a Pioneer Super Qualifier on the 17th of April. He went 7-1 with it. And so people took notice, and it's appeared in essentially the same form in Pioneer Challenges, Pioneer Leagues, Pioneer Super Qualifiers. So it definitely has some chops. So you're going to probably be saying, so, okay, Gruul Aggro, nothing new in Pioneer, but this is Companion Gruul. And much like in our Panza deck dive last week, this deck is featuring Obosh the Prey Piercer. I think he's piercing the prey with those pointy legs.
Oh.
Pierce. That's the noise of piercing. Pierce. So if you forget what Obosh does, it's 3 Rakdos, hybrid mana for a 3/5 companion. It forces you to have odd CMC costs for all your cards in the main deck. And the payoff is that all of your odd CMC sources deal double damage. So pretty cool. You kind of see where this is going. It doesn't take a lot of thinking to say, okay, if I run a lot of big aggressive things in my Gruul aggro deck and I play my Obosh, they deal a lot more damage and I win games. Right?
Mm-hmm.
That did not take a lot of thinking. You're correct.
No. So how does this differ from the old Gruul aggro decks that ostensibly were doing the same thing, just without double damage, right? So they had plenty of even CMC cards that had to be removed for this version. So that could be, there's all sorts of different ways to build these aggressive Gruul decks. So you have things like Burning Tree Emissary or a Hazaret or Questing Beast or Voltaic Brawler, or the newer Zirda Goblin. You get your Lightning Strikes. That's even CMC. You don't get access to the only 3 damage burn spell. You don't get your Chandra Torch of Defiance. You don't get your Scavenging Ooze. Maybe sometimes you want a Rekindling Phoenix in there. Also, interestingly, you don't get your Collected Company. So that was an important card advantage and card selection engine. And you don't get your finisher of Embercleave anymore. That's a big subtraction, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
it's just giant 3 CMC creatures. Is kind of
essentially it's big stuff. Yeah, and you get some different finishers. So you don't have Embercleave. You get stuff like Crater's Claws as kind of a giant fireball with upside. And you have this runs stuff that would typically be seen maybe in a green stompy deck, like perhaps Ronus and things like that. And Klothys is in this deck, of course, too. So I'll talk a little bit more about all the bits and pieces that go into how the deck plays out. So and how it's built. So the construction of the deck is much like other Gruul or green-based decks, like I just said, right? So we have our 8-mana Elves, we have our Bony G's, we have Lovestruck Beast, we have Ronus, we have Steelleaf Champion, we have Yorvo, Gruul Spellbreaker, and our old friend Klothys. And for some additional value, some increased clock, some potential flexibility, you get cards like Domri Anarch of Bolas, you get the Great Henge, and like I said, Crater's Claws, which is just a fireball with the ferocious upside that if you have a creature with 4 or more damage, you add 2 to the X. So let's say you cast it for 1 red and 3 other mana. If you've got something with 4 or more power, it deals 5 damage. Pretty cool. So how does this deck play out? Like usual, it's really reliant on having that opening hand of green and red lands and a mana dork, because you really want to be ramping to 3, especially when you have almost nothing to do on turn 2 except for the stomp off of your Bone Crusher Giant. So it's really challenging to want to keep a hand that doesn't have some acceleration. But again, those hands don't always come to you, especially because the mana challenges of allied mana, I may have mentioned those in past episodes. There's a lot of, like Dave said, there's a lot of really redundant pieces to play out on turn 3. You have Lovestruck Beast, you have Yorvo, you have Steelleaf Champion, and these are kind of like your backbone of big green beaters. And Bone Crusher Giant gives you kind of your flexible shock and your 4/3 creature. A Gruul Spellbreaker is interesting in this because it can be cast as a 3/3 with haste or as a 4/4. And that's nice because it gives you a decent sized body on 3, or late game, it's like a bunch of haste damage out of nowhere.
Plus it has trample. So if you've got Obosh out, it is dealing an extra little punch.
Yeah, Gruul Spellbreaker is definitely a nice late game card. It's something that I would sandbag. Like I would almost always play some other 3-drop because I want to get Spellbreaker as a surprise. So you get that haste with Obosh. It's a hasty 6/3, and with a trample that can be pretty choice for finishing off the opponent. I liked Ronus in this deck too for similar reasons, because it lets you buff your creatures past blockers. So with Obosh out as well, each of your pumps off of the Ronus is worth 4 damage, and you're giving trample. So it's a nice way to get past a board stall late game after you eventually stabilize, get that Obosh out, and just have some giant creatures to pump up. There's some interesting options also for like long game value out of stuff like the Great Henge and Klothys. I think Klothys suffers a little bit in Pioneer because you can't ramp almost at all unless you're playing against a deck that's running the what's the sacrifice? Fabled Passage. Yeah.
Well, when you say ramp, you mean fetch, right? Like this deck ramps, but you don't have good ways to get lands into your graveyard.
Yeah, because Klothys isn't the main phase trigger off Klothys. You'd almost never have a land.
Yeah,
right.
To trigger.
I mean, you're always doing 2 damage with it, I guess. But
yes,
yeah, you kind of wish you had the ramp sometimes too, because then you can go into a bigger. You can go into Obosh on turn 3 if you get lucky.
Yes, that would be nice. The life swing, like you said, especially with Obosh doing like the extra 2 damage off of the trigger is significant, though. The deck really does come alive with Obosh. So once you are on maybe turn 4, turn 5, you're able to play Obosh, hopefully with a couple other big creatures out, and all of your threats become these incredible damage producers. Like your 5/5 Lovestruck Beast is swinging for 10. Your Hasty Gruul Spellbreaker is swinging for 6 trample. Your Crater's Claws cast for 5 mana, typically with a Ferocious trigger, you can just deal 12 to someone's dome, just like that.
Yeah.
Important strategic note, do not cast your Crater's Claws for even mana.
Because then it doesn't do it.
Doesn't do it. And then you lose, like I did.
Whoops.
Because you're like, oh.
Wait, you lost?
Yeah, I had lethal if I had just removed the creature with Crater's Claws, and I did it for like an even amount of mana, and then they didn't die, and I was like, poop-a-doop. So anyway, the deck sort of plays out in interesting ways because sometimes you want to be getting damage in before the opponent can stabilize. Like if they're playing a more controlling deck, you want to avoid their planeswalkers, you want to get under their counter spells, you want to get under their sweepers. But other times, and I think more typically in the current state of Pioneer, you're building a wide board, you're being defensive, and then you're turning the corner. So you're making that big swing by maybe removing a specific creature off the board and then getting lethal in, or you're trampling over with a pumped up creature off of Aronis, or you're just doming them with a gigantic Crater's Claws. Another option that this deck has for kind of surprise burst damage is with Slaughterhorn, which is your odd CMC, kind of like Gore Clan Rampager. It's typically run as a 2 or 3 of, and it gives, for Blood Rush, you discard it, pay a green mana, and it gives your target attacking creature +3/+2 until end of turn. So that's +6/+2 in a with Obosh down. Pretty good.
Whoa.
Yeah. Shocking.
I didn't realize that Obosh improved like a combat trick.
No, it doesn't improve the combat trick. It just effectively improves the combat trick.
I see what you're saying. Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, it's basically, is it like a scale up?
Yeah.
Then almost, which is pretty funny.
I mean, I will say, I thought Slaughterhorn came out a lot because it's one of those cards where it's not always great.
Yeah.
I mean, because it's just a 3 mana 3/2 if you're desperate. And you don't want to be desperate in a deck like this.
Right.
And so a lot of the thinking, much like you mentioned, Dave, a lot of the thinking in this deck goes into playing with Obosh in the back of your mind. So it's like, how am I playing for this burst? Am I playing for this burst win? Am I playing for like a go wide win where I just have a bunch of 5 damage and 4 damage creatures and I eventually get enough of them down that they just can't stop lethal? Am I going over the top with like one of my 2 Crater's Claws? Am I hoping to draw into those? Am I going to remove something with the Crater's Claws and then swing in for lethal? So you can aggro people out, but I think it's typically more of like a longer game deck where you try to maneuver yourself into a position to get that sort of longer game value against certain opponents.
So that's really interesting because I was going to ask how fast this deck was. Since one of the things that stick out to me is it has literally no sources of card advantage.
Yeah. It depends on how fast you can get the Obosh down. And I think I'll talk about this and I think sort of the weaknesses coming up, but I think relying on your mana dorks and relying on your mana dorks surviving is potentially an issue at times. And it's a pretty land light deck. Like most of the decks were in like 22 lands, and that wasn't exactly my favorite. Like I definitely felt like an extra land or two could be valuable because it's a little bit greedy, I think, especially in a meta where removal and burn is more popular than ever, I think, in terms of the burn based strategies.
In terms of the burn.
Especially for Pioneer where Lurrus has made Boros burn suddenly a thing there.
Yeah. So let's talk about some strengths of this deck. I think that there's a lot of creatures with a lot of toughness. And so playing against burn decks makes the removal not very great, and you can stabilize on the ground really well. So like anyone who's played a red deck knows what a pain like a Lovestruck Beast is. And when you have like 4 redundant copies of some kind of Lovestruck Beast-like creature, that doesn't make things good for red removal. And a lot of the 3-drops make Fatal Push less good as well because it requires other permanents to leave the battlefield. So unless they have like a Fabled Passage triggering it, you can sort of intelligently try to avoid making silly blocks or silly attacks or removing things that you don't really need to. Because like pre-combat, you're like, okay, well, I can stomp this blocker and get some extra damage in, and then they just Fatal Push your creature before attacks, and you're like, poop, that was dumb.
You're like why did I do that?
I didn't need to do that at all. Like, don't turn on the Fatal Pushes unless you have to, type thing. And like I said before, I think one of the strengths is just Obosh because it's a big time game changer. Like nothing else really does what Obosh does in terms of sheer damage increase.
Did you mention the interaction between Obosh and Domri?
In terms of Domri's pump, like being like a sort of an extra little pump.
And the fight ability.
Sure.
The fight doubles too from Obosh.
Yeah, though, I mean, that's nice. Perfectly nice. Like if you have something huge to get off the board, you certainly can. I was in a position in one round where if I could have like the fight would have won me the game, but it just they were able to do something. Like if I had one more turn, but that's magic, right? This is not being a bad beat story, but just saying the power of the fight is there for sure. Like you can clear a very big aura'd up creature in the Aura's deck, right? Like you fight it off the board and then you get a ton of damage through, for example, and that's definitely there. But sometimes it's like, especially in the Aura's deck, if they get one more Aura on that creature, then you're like, well, crap, this fight's not even doing it now. I think there are plenty of weaknesses, of course, though. I mean, this is an ally deck in Pioneer, and the mana sucks. Game Trail still sucks. Big time, really big time. I think that the current builds feel a little greedy, especially on the red end of things. Like I would add at least one mountain. Like I think I had an extra mountain when I was playing. It just pays to be safe, I think, in decks like this, especially when mana dorks are going to get picked off. I mean, Sultai's still out there, Burn's still out there, this deck's still out there. The Aura's deck typically either runs Fatal Push main or has access to Fatal Push in the side, and that's extremely popular. So you're going to see ways to get your mana dorks picked off, and then you're going to be, well, I got nothing to do in turn 2. I'm not ramping out into anything, and that puts you really behind on tempo. And Pioneer is extremely board-based. It's extremely board control-based, and losing that can be pretty debilitating. Combine that with the fact that a lot of times your mana might be coming into play tapped, like you top deck a Game Trail as your third land. You're not holding a Stomping Ground. You're not holding a forest or a mountain, and you're like, well, here's my third land coming into play tapped after they shocked my elf.
Yeah, I meant to do that.
What a start.
Feels really good.
Yeah.
So the tempo issues are real, and but I still think eventually the mana will catch up and Gruul will feel pretty darn good. I also think, speaking of the speed question you asked, Dan, I think it's not incredibly fast versus some of the combo strategies, especially ones like Inverter, because they're also interacting with your hand, they're interacting with your board. You're not applying enough pressure, and you're eventually going to lose the game.
Bummer.
I know. I'm sorry. But thankfully, I mean, Inverter's popularity has waned a bit. But at the same time, speaking of the future of this deck, I think the popularity of this deck already seems to be waning a bit. I don't know if it has anything to do with like the inherent flaws of this deck right now, but I think more on the position that it has in the metagame. But I'm already seeing a trend downward from, Yama Killer takes us to a tournament. We've got like 5 players playing it in the next tournament, and then there's none in the latest challenge. There's one in the latest challenge, but there's none in the challenge or the super qualifier before that. So I mean that's the natural variation of the meta, but typically you see the same deck showing up more frequently, and what we see showing up more frequently is auras, and this deck has an awfully hard time dealing with auras because the creatures get huge. They have lifelink, they have vigilance, they get out of your burn range, even with your Creator's Claws typically. And you have a really hard time playing to the long game unless you are fortunate enough to have something like Aronis, because then you get Death Touch, and that's pretty nice, and indestructible. So that helps out sometimes. You also can put them in a position where even with, let's say, one huge suited up lifelinker, they can't actually swing in. If they don't have vigilance, the crackback's really bad. And so you can kind of put them in a position where you continue to build your board wide and try to surprise them with an Obosh. Maybe you have like a really big Creator's Claws at that point. You can pick off even a like 9 power, like 9 toughness creature and then swing in. That's more fortunate than not, because typically what they're doing is just overrunning you, because they get up to 45 life. They have like a 11/11 lifelinker with vigilance, and you just have no way to get it off the board.
Yeah, that's brutal for red decks. I mean, if it's like if you wanted to tech against it, you'd have to run like that card that kills all enchantments. And
Yeah, the sideboard right now, I think runs Natural State, I believe, is a typical inclusion. And I think the one to go to at this point is just get all enchantments off board.
Yeah.
Which is, costs 1 more mana. It makes you unable to run Obosh. But if you're running Back to Nature, destroying all enchantments, you're probably going to get you're going to be far enough ahead on board to swing and, get the win, hopefully.
I noticed that Heaven and Earth is also in the sideboard. Is that just a concession to how good like the flyers are in black-white? Like if they have a flyer suited up, can you deal with that without a Domery?
The X cost on that would still probably not be enough. Do you know what I mean? Like, because you're paying green and an X to deal X damage to each creature with flying. You're not going to typically have enough mana to get to that. But yeah, I didn't run Heaven and Earth in my deck. This is a sort of a more recent inclusion. I definitely think that you need to heavily tech against auras right now in Pioneer. So run all the Back to Natures you can. I lost a game versus auras where I drew 2 hate cards, an extra piece of removal, and thought I had the game on lockdown. And they can just rally back really quickly. I think if auras becomes more targeted against in the meta and then slips down a bit, I do think this deck has some better game against other bigger players in the meta right now. Like I was talking about how I think it has a very favorable matchup against Burn right now. You get your big creatures down, you have some incidental life gain through Klothys, and you're going to take over the game. You're going to win the long game versus Burn, I think. Mono White Devotion is probably a little bit more even. Like their defensive creatures can't really keep up with the threats you're presenting, but then you don't get a lot of great interaction against their combo. And if you combine that with the enchantment-based removal they have to just keep picking off your creatures, depending on the volume of removal they have or draw into, things can be tough. I think it's more of an even matchup than the Auras deck for sure. One thing I was thinking about for the future of this deck, though, is why not black-green Stompy? Like you get to keep your Fatal Pushes versus Auras. You get to keep your Thoughtseize versus combo. You get to run a bunch of your same giant creatures, and you get access to something like Rotting Regisaur. But, of course, you lose a lot of the red stuff you have access to, especially your finishers like Klothys and Creator's Claws, which is probably not a really big benefit for you. But I feel like it's so weak personally, I feel like it's so weak against the Auras deck that I really want access to push, potentially. But maybe if you just load up on green enchantment removal, you're decent enough in that fight. I did see a single black-green Obosh deck in a recent league, but obviously it's not as popular right now because we're not seeing it in all sorts of lists. But I think that might be something to test if you're curious about Obosh. If you like black-green strategies, why not give it a shot? Because I think having the hand interaction and the board interaction is going to be an advantage there.
All right, before we get to your rating.
Yeah.
Number one tip for someone who is playing against an Obosh style deck.
Yeah.
What do you think people need to do to try to outmaneuver the plans that Obosh presents?
Well, I mean, of course, the easiest thing, right, is keep the board clear. Easier said than done. And then also don't put yourself in a position to lose to an Obosh being played, because you always know it's coming, right? You always know it could be coming. So that's easier said than done as well. Like if you're playing a Fatal Push deck, sandbag that Fabled Passage as long as possible, right? Because then you could pick off. You can't get Obosh. Obosh is 5 mana,
right?
But you can get a 3 mana creature, or even a hasted 3 mana creature out of the hand, like the Gruul Spellbreaker or something like that.
Yeah. That's the big thing about Obosh, right? Is that there's almost no ways to kill it at instant speed in Pioneer, right?
Well, there's that new card,
the no counters one.
Yeah, there's the no counters card. There's Assassin's Trophy.
Oh, good. There you go.
Yeah,
and that's all you need.
There you go.
So yeah, I mean, if you're playing black, definitely keep those on hand. And it's one of those things where it's in their deck, and they're going to want to play it.
Right.
Yeah, Lightning Axe kills it, Dave.
Well, that's the main card I was thinking. I was Lightning Axe, and I was like, ain't nobody playing Lightning Axe right now.
Keep your counter spells up. Counter spell the Obosh. There's not going to be. I mean, if you lose to the slow plotting of all the rest of the creatures, then sure, that's bad, but it's a lot worse to lose in a single turn with the Obosh, I think. Especially if you have some sweepers, if you're drawing to sweepers, you want to maintain your single point removal or your bounce or something like that for an Obosh.
All right. So what do you think of this deck all in?
This deck right now, I think is a kind of a believe minus, and it's mainly because I don't think it's the best thing to be doing right now. Because the speed, the size of the creatures, the life gain of the Auras deck, combined with what Lurrus brings to the Auras deck, I think is really bad for you. And the allied mana makes you lose to it. You can lose to that. And I think that just people have effective ways to fight against what you're doing. But I think that if things slow down in some way, if you're able to set up a roadblock of giant toughness creatures, some with indestructible, and be getting value off of your Klothys over the long game, I think that you could up the Klothys in this deck, by the way. I think 1 main might be too low because of the amount of life loss you're experiencing because of the decks you're playing against. Certainly a great mid-range deck, but I'm not sure that it's kind of what I want to be doing until someone checks Auras a little bit more. And I think, again, Gruul will be in a great place in like a year or two when we have access to some better mana, and it's able to fight on a more even playing field with enemy color decks.
Thanks, Shane.
No, thank you, Stan. Thanks for listening.
My pleasure. Thank you for playing Pioneer for us. Maybe I'll play Pioneer next week. It's my turn now, right? I get to talk?
It is. You had the cutest companion, I think.
You didn't leave me a lot of time, so I'm just going to jump into it.
We both went like 25, 30 minutes, so good luck, Stan.
Sorry.
Yeah, I'm going to just cut to the chase. The deck I played was amazing. Truly, truly fantastic. And if you want me to wait till the very end of my section to give you an actual rating, I'll do that. But I'm telling you, I loved this deck, and I think it's very good. And it is Zirda Elves. Basically a green-white elf deck that's slotting Zirda the Dawnmaker. 1 Boros mana for an elemental fox. The companion clause is that each permanent in your starting deck has to have an activated ability. It also says that abilities that you activate that aren't mana abilities cost 2 generic mana less to activate. this effect cannot reduce the mana in that cost to less than 1 mana. So bare minimum, you're always paying at least 1 mana to activate an ability, but in some cases, that's all you have to pay. Mm-hmm. It also has 1 tap, target creature can't block this turn, and it's a 3/3.
How often did that come up?
So often.
Okay.
It's one of the reasons why this card is like crazy good, is because nobody realizes that it makes creatures practically unblockable.
That's amazing. All right, let's hear it.
All right. So what is this deck that I'm playing? Green-White Elves. It's an elf deck that combines several different combo strategies into one deck. Sometimes I would lovingly refer to it as oops, all combos. And really the goal of this deck is to win on turn 3 or turn 4. Usually by giving your creatures either infinite power and toughness, or by producing infinite mana and then swinging for lethal with a bunch of juiced up creatures that you made giant with all of your mana. Sometimes it's just one, sometimes it's several creatures doing the swinging, but ultimately this is a creature-based combo strategy that needs to swing for lethal to win. And Zirda is a big part of the deck since it can make the cost of enabling some of those combos cheap enough that the right pieces together just go infinite. And I'll go more into the actual combos in a little bit because there are several at play. But the core of the deck is that a bunch of mana dorks and a handful of payoffs come together, and with Zirda as the glue holding it all together, with 1/3 of your deck being mana dorks, you have like a lot of consistency for some of your key combo pieces. A, Zirda is always in your deck, or B, you're always going to draw at least a creature that produces mana. And this deck emerged pretty shortly after the release of Elob. I think it came out like after the first weekend was when it first started seeing some play. And I heard about it in the Slack when, Citizen Craig told us that someone had built this deck and it was going undefeated with no sideboard. And I don't know if at that time that was happening like in a Discord channel or on Twitch or what, but eventually the deck hit Reddit, I think by that original architect. Then it was streamed on Twitch by friend of the show, Aspiring Spike, playing kind of a version of it. And then it also appeared in a 5.0 list on Friday, and then we saw a version of it in the Modern Challenge. So the deck is kind of like picking up steam right now. And I decided to play it because A, I love elves. I've talked about it before. I'll probably mention them again. I think elves are a cool tribe, especially in Modern.
You are an elf on our token.
That's also true.
Yep.
I do love a turn 3 kill.
Who doesn't?
It's a great thing to do in Modern, especially. I don't know if I mentioned that I'm playing the Modern version of Elves, so I'll let that be clear. And also, Elves has been struggling a bit lately, especially after the release of Modern Horizons. But I felt like the speed and the potential consistency of this deck sounded like maybe the kind of juice that a struggling tribe might need to stay competitive. And I gotta say, the fact that it had like this hype surrounding the fact that this person went 4-1 in Modern leagues twice without a sideboard. Like they were trying to do the meme thing and get a trophy without one. They never got it, but still, like I thought that was a really interesting platform to just kind of like bounce off of.
Yeah.
All right, so what are the combos? There are several. I don't want to spend too much time on them, but we have to explain what they are.
This list is more than several. This is a lot of combos.
This is a multifaceted bullet list.
This is 9 combos.
There's 9 combos in here.
All right, and there's some redundancy among them. Zirda is like integral to several. Umbral Mantle is integral to several.
You're going to have to describe some of these to me too. So why don't we hop in on the first one you have on your list, which is Zirda, Izuri, and Devoted Druid. How does this work?
I want to actually be looking at the cards while I'm talking about them too.
Sure.
No, go from memory.
You got to double check the text, or otherwise we're going to get letters.
Yeah, that's true. Eventually, I was going off memory once I was on my 3rd league, but it still helps to read.
Stan, Azuri Claw of Progress is not Modern legal, okay?
Oh God, what rooms was I in? All right, so first combo, Zirda plus Izuri plus Devoted Druid. Basically, infinite Izuri activations that can pump all the elves on your board with infinite power and toughness and trample, including the original Devoted Druid. What happens here is that Zirda makes the Izuri cost to give your creatures +3/+3 and trample only cost 3 green mana. And if your Devoted Druid doesn't have any -1 counters on it, you tap it the first time to make a green mana, the second time to make a green mana, or you don't even have to cast it the second time if you have mana up. You basically have to activate Azuri one time to make your Devoted Druid able to tap and untap infinite number of times.
I see. So what happens here is you put negative counters on it.
Eventually you kind of have to, but they don't actually shrink your creature.
Right. They don't kill it because Azuri keeps giving it +3/+3.
Yeah.
Got it. So it doesn't wipe out the counters because they're not +1/+1 counters, but it just doesn't die. And so as long as you have other creatures, you can make everything huge, including a giant Azuri.
Including a giant Devoted Druid.
Right. That I guess eventually you can untap and attack with too. That makes sense too.
Right.
Okay.
So there's one. One of the other key combos, and this is the one that actually threatens a turn 3 kill, is Zirda plus Umbral Mantle plus any mana dork. So Umbral Mantle is a 3-mana equipment artifact that says equipped creature has pay 3, untap with the little untap symbol. Mm-hmm. This creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn. It's also equip 0. Mm-hmm. So with Zirda out, that untap ability only costs 1. So you tap your mana dork with Zirda out, and you only have to pay that 1 mana to untap it again with the Umbral Mantle. You do that infinite times, your creature becomes a 20/20. If you're doing this on turn 4 and Zirda's been out for a turn, you can now tap an opposing creature to clear the way for your 20/20 mana dork, and you swing for lethal.
How do you get both Zirda and Umbral Mantle out on turn 3?
So you cast the Umbral Mantle on turn 2 because it's harder to interact with the artifact, especially in game 1.
Okay.
And you have a mana dork on turn 1. So you have to hit all of your land drops. You have to have a turn 1 mana dork.
But it's not that hard.
No.
It's not that complicated, yeah.
No, I think there's 20 mana dorks in this deck. It's not hard.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay.
So that's one.
Ding.
Yeah. Zirda plus Umbral Mantle plus Jaroga Tree Speaker equals infinite mana and infinite power toughness on every creature that has a tap ability. And you can also use this combo to prevent all opponents' creatures from blocking. Jaroga Tree Speaker is a single mana level up creature. If it gets to levels 1 through 4, it can tap to add green, and it is a 1/2. That extra toughness is kind of relevant. If it's levels 5 onward, all of your elves can tap to make green. This one didn't come up as often. Tree Speaker was just kind of like a creature that gets you out of a tight spot. More on that later. Azuri plus 2 Devoted Druids without any Zirda is just infinite Azuri activations. Azuri plus Leyline of Abundance plus Devoted Druid equals infinite Azuri activations and infinite power and toughness on every elf, including the original Druid. This deck runs Marwyn the Nurturer. Marwyn plus Umbral Mantle, and that's it, is infinite mana, infinite power toughness on everything that can tap for mana. It's got Elvish Archdruid plus Umbral Mantle plus 2 other elves equals infinite power and toughness on the Archdruid. Archdruid plus the Mantle plus 3 other elves equals infinite power and toughness on anything that can tap for mana. Last one, Zirda, Umbral Mantle plus any elf plus Leyline equals infinite mana and power and toughness on everything that can tap and your opponents can't block. Now, can you guys repeat those back to me?
Yeah, got it.
That's consistency for you.
I'm here.
So the first deck I played was just a ton of elves plus 4 copies of Mantle plus 4 copies of Collected Company. And then Everett took this on Twitch and started jiggering it about to try to make it a little bit more grindy and a little less all in on the combo. And I did not play that deck. I didn't really like that version, but one thing that I really liked that Everett did was he added 4 copies of Stoneforge Mystic. So what Stoneforge Mystic does, if you play that version of the deck, is that A, it adds virtual copies of your Umbral Mantle. It also gives you the ability to fetch up a Batterskull. No swords, just Batterskull, which can actually, I found, help win some matchups just outright. Like against humans, Batterskull was so good. Against Burn, Battleskull was fantastic. And I mean, ultimately, Battleskull might just win you the game. It might just buy you time until you find an Umbral Mantle.
This is so awesome.
Dude, Stoneforge also lets you cheat important combo pieces into play, sometimes for just 1 mana when Zirda's around.
Right.
And that 1 mana difference often can be like game changing because your margins of mana are so narrow here. And like ultimately at the bottom line, I feel like Zirda might just effectively solve a lot of the problems that Elves have been facing after Modern Horizons. Because what Modern Horizons did to this deck is that it added Plague Engineer, seriously nerfing like a lot of tribal strategies, especially Elves. Renin 6, which just pings off all of your mana dorks, and Lava Dart, which does the same thing. And as a result, Elves has been really struggling in the meta since then. And in the past, black-green Elves decks couldn't really win on turn 3. Even with the nut draw, you might have like a virtual kill, but you would literally need to flood the board and cast a Shaman of the Pack, maybe sometimes cast double Shaman of the Pack. So if you didn't have enough Elves, or your mana dorks were picked off every turn, or an opponent resolved a Plague Engineer, it would be like impossible to just stabilize and recover at that point. But by adding these combo finishes that you can now threaten on turn 3, I feel like this tribal deck can now race a Plague Engineer if you're on the play, or potentially win by casting 2 spells on the same turn, or using one of those Elves that has 2 power to enable the mana engine instead of counting on a wide board. Also, like I said, no one remembers that Zirda has an activated ability, so even though it's a must kill, sometimes they just don't kill it. Sometimes, and perhaps not incorrectly, they kill a mana dork because that's like what you need to keep tapping for the combo. But, you know, if you got multiple removal spells and you let a Zirda live, that might just mean game over, because a lot of these combos can be activated at an instant speed in response to someone's removal spell. Also, the deck doesn't even need Zirda to rely on combo kills. Like Leyline of Abundance is fantastic. Azuri plus Devoted Druids is fantastic. Batterskull, why not? So it's got all these things going for it. I've been talking this deck up. I got to be fair and balanced. There are some weaknesses to it, right? And like I said, it's a creature-based combo deck, and I think as a result, it struggles from a lot of the same things that creature-based combo decks have in the past. Like Burn is really popular right now. Killing a mana dork every turn or using a burn spell to kill your Zirda can be pretty backbreaking. You'll probably never recover. Mm-hmm. Mid-range being around, like all these Thoughtseize decks, being able to pick out your combo pieces or, you know, find a way to deal with like your maybe 1 copy of Umbral Mantle could be a pretty huge setback. It also doesn't have the type of redundancy that you'll sometimes see in Devoted Druid combo decks, because while you have 20 mana dorks and you always have Zirda in your hand, maybe finding that like artifact you need to seal the deal, if you don't have a Stoneforge Mystic, there's just like no way to fetch it up, right? It's not running Eladamri's Call. It's not running Finale of Devastation.
Right. Yeah, so some of the combo pieces don't go together, even though there are so many combos in here. It's not like you get, you know, there's 12 in column A and 12 in column B, and any of those go together. It's kind of just like, yeah.
Yeah, but like even if you don't find the combo pieces and you just have a bunch of mana dorks and an Archdruid and Azuri,
you can do a lot.
Then you can, in theory, still play Beatdown. Especially if you cast a Zirda, then those Azuri activations are really cheap. So even if the combo isn't a I win button, sometimes it's just making like the other good cards in your deck more efficient.
Yeah.
I also think one of the struggles for this deck is that Zirda actually exemplifies where the Companion Clause is a deck building restriction and a limitation, because having a white-based deck that can't run something like Rest in Peace or Stony Silence does feel like a setback. You have to count on like Relic of Progenitus and Tormod's Crypt as some of your graveyard hate cards. And my personal opinion, like if you can run white, you should run Rest in Peace, especially in a deck that doesn't care about your graveyard at all. Relic, not quite as good. But
you got to do it, unfortunately.
You got to do it, David.
Yeah.
So that's how I feel. Like this deck is, I think, fantastic. Maybe if mid-range dies down a little bit, maybe if burn dies down a little bit, I think this deck can like seriously be page 1 of the modern archetype on MTG Goldfish. Like I can see this like stealing tournaments down the line just because like the consistency of these combo finishes. Like if you're not winning on turn 3, it's easier to win on turn 4. So yeah, this is a sleeve. Like, if companions stick around, I think Zirda making activated abilities really powerful, activated abilities cheaper, is just a card to keep an eye on in general. And the fact that she has this killer synergy with Umbral Mantle and Mana Dorks, which we're already seeing tons of play in Modern, like whether it was Bird of Paradise, whether it was Noble Hierarch, what have you. The opportunity cost in the right deck doesn't seem that low either.
Stan with the only sleeve.
Sleeve plus.
The only sleeve.
Sleeve plus, baby. Elves is back.
I'm loving it. So it's not a double sleeve. Not yet.
Well, double sleeve means it's so good that it's bad. And I think it'd be a double sleeve if they had like turn 2 kills. And I literally don't think it does.
Yeah. This is awesome. I love this list.
Yeah. And I think this is a deck that Shane would like to play. Shane used to love like the creature combo decks, and this does that. And it's fun sometimes having to like kind of sit there and figure out your line and like how you're going to arrange your pieces to execute that turn 3 kill. Feels super rewarding as well. It's still a lot of clicking, but it's only like 10 clicks.
Right.
After about 10 clicks, you're done. You can stop clicking. You can hit OK. So yeah, I loved it. What can I say? I'm in love.
In love with your first love. Elves are back.
This is, I think, my first time playing a green-white deck and like really enjoying it. Maybe I played like Devoted Devastation for Science before as well, but like that was just kind of a pill I had to swallow. This, I seriously considered running this deck in our Slack league, just because like my early experiences with it were so strong. I did 2 leagues with it, loved it. I have to stop. Get me out of here. I'm just going to gush all day.
All right. It's a sleeve from Stan on Zirda Elves.
Nice.
I gave a believe to Lurrus Death Shadow, which is maybe a little tempered just because I think there's better Lurrus decks. And Shane gave a believe minus.
Yeah. Believe minus with potential upside. So last week, I tried to be a little bit measured in my slight negativity towards companions. How are you all feeling about companions with another week under our belts and a lot more decks and a lot more games played with and against companion decks? David.
Stan.
Shane. Oh, that's me. Stan.
Listen, anyone who follows me on Twitter knows that...
At Medium Gallery.
Knows that I have not been a critic of Companion. And I think part of that is twofold. A very common saying. Part of that is the fact that like Modern is really fun right now because we got an injection of new cards. Just like blanket statement, prior to Elob, it was feeling a little stale. A lot of Titan, a lot of blue-green, a lot of like Panza even. And now we had this massive change, and the format is just like practically unrecognizable. Magic is practically unrecognizable. And I feel like it's a really exciting time to be playing this game. And Magic has been good about that, right? Like keeping things exciting by any means necessary.
I got to say, Stan, this is totally what I think right now, too.
Cool.
I've had a ton of fun playing Modern Leagues, playing random decks, seeing decks that are in the dumps. I can co-sign with that statement.
Can I keep going just briefly?
I want you to, yeah. Do it.
Yeah, I don't want to absorb the conversation, but I've been thinking about my feelings a lot. And like...
That's good. That's healthy.
I wonder if Companion would be as big of an issue within the community if Lurrus just wasn't one of them.
It would be. Because it's a fundamental way to the game that the game's sort of changed in the way that the decks are expected to be built. So I think there would be a response in that way.
Sure. I mean, I think your reaction there kind of rests on the notion that change might be bad. And I'm kind of resting on the notion that change might not be bad.
Sure.
And just kind of like this inevitable cycle of this dynamic game that prints new cards every 3 months. I also think that the discourse around companions is homogenized by the fact that people can only play online. And these high-level tournaments are just kind of like the only way people can kind of see this meta evolve. And what happens is we don't have the LGS to offset some of the high-level competitive discourse. Because like even when Oko was a card, even when Phoenix or Faithless Looting were cards, like we could still go to the LGS and sometimes play Elf guy or play Burn guy or play Trine guy or gal. And, you know, like now we don't really have that. And we're just kind of in this environment where if you're on MTGO, you're very likely to be playing against someone who can rent any deck, or if you're on Arena, you're playing against someone who's got wild cards and can access practically any card. So there's less escape from this reality, and likewise less reason not to play with these potentially new busted things.
Stan, I think you have been speaking, though, to the ease at which you can acquire these cards. You grab one $20 Lurrus, in the world where we're purchasing paper Magic cards, and you have yourself Lurrus Burn.
Yeah.
You don't have to change anything else. I mean,
I love that.
Well, that's I think we would be seeing this at the LGS, is what I'm saying. I don't think that people would be like, running out old Burn when they could just drop, money on a new Lurrus or something like that. I don't think they'd be running SRAM auras without Lurrus or things like that. So I think that we would be seeing them because of the ease at which one can acquire these cards. I like your positivity, Stan, because I think that it's if the game is going to change in some fashion, we either have to accept it or complain incessantly. There's no middle ground,
and we choose the latter.
Shane's here to tell you about option 2.
No, I don't think. I want to run this by you though. Okay, y'all, what is the long-term plan here for WotC, for the game? Because let's avoid the immediate near-term issues of like samey type stuff, of boredom, of potential power level issues with Lurrus. I want to talk a little bit about long-term. Like, what are the ways in which they can keep making companions that are interesting to build around and offer reasons to run the cards at the same time. So we have 10 here, and they've already hit even cards, odd cards, creature types, deck size, color requirements, CMC restrictions above and below. What are they going to do next? Like, I mean, we could iterate on this and get really down to like nitty gritty aspects. Like everything has to have flash, which would be insane, right? But there's all sorts of stuff that you could get to, but they're immediately hitting on the main things that one would brainstorm when doing companions. And so anything else would likely be so restrictive or a silly enough restriction that it would push them out of competitive playing, I think, probably. So what's the long-term goal here? Like, are we going to see just the huge players in the game show up and do something? Do you think WotC has a long-term plan to keep making companions? If not, are we just going to have like Lurrus be amazing for X number of months until maybe it's so good and ubiquitous it gets banned? I'm curious what you guys think. I said a lot.
Well, I think one thing I would say here is, okay, I have 2 questions. One, Shane, are you enjoying the games where you're playing against companions? Yes or no?
You know what? I don't have any drastic changes about the way I feel about the game right now.
Okay.
Nothing drastic.
Perfect.
You're not running for office.
God, I know.
I have no recollection of how I felt playing any of these games.
I plead the 5th.
I mean, I don't love the must answer threat that you can get on curve at any time.
Okay. And then the other thing I would say is, I think so I do think there's design space issues with companions. I think that I think it's easier to use the same restrictions over and over again, though, that have different payoffs that would give you different incentives to build a deck a certain way, right? You could have permanence be even or odd on a different companion. It's not necessarily something that only Obosh owns.
Yeah.
Like there's, you give a different benefit. Like, so there's a bunch of these that could be evergreen. Here's my take. You guys want my bottom line take? So Shane's like out long-term. Stan is in long-term. Here's my take. Since I've been stuck here in quarantine or social distancing or stay at home or whatever, you know what I do every day? That's secret. Before I go to bed, before I go to bed every day, I open a pint of Ben and Jerry's ice cream, and I have like a quarter of my Ben and Jerry's ice cream.
Okay.
I don't have a whole one.
I thought you were going to say I open the Sam's Club multi-pack.
No.
And plow through.
I have some Ben and Jerry's ice cream every night.
What's your flavor?
Every night. Chubby Hubby, which is happening right here as I'm stuck in.
I know you are, but what am I?
Yeah, exactly. I'm not going to do that after this is over. After I'm back out in the real world, I'm going to have to get back on Weight Watchers. I'm going to have to watch myself, but I'm enjoying it right now. And that's how I feel about companions, is that this is like a fun moment where we get to experience modern in a different way. And I will get to a point where I don't want any more of this. And so I hope their plan is not that Magic is going to be this way forever. And I hope that there's a lot of chat about people being like, they're going to have companions in every set from now on. There are some tweets from people like Sam Black that really make me worried that there will be companions from now on. I don't really want that forever, but I am enjoying it right now. And maybe I'll enjoy it for the next 6 months. And then it'll come to a point where I'm like, all right, it's time for us to move on from this and go back to Magic what it was, or to go on to whatever the next thing Magic's going to be. But that's how I feel about it. Fun for now. It's going to get tired. So let's just enjoy it for now. And then let's all set up a time 4 months from now when we can really start complaining about it. And then we'll try to get rid of them.
Wow. Very fair and very reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
I am known for my tempered takes.
I want to keep arguing, but like, Dave, you just kind of made me want to be nice to people instead.
How did I make you feel about ice cream?
I want it.
Yeah, I've got some watermelon popsicles. Might have to crack one open after this.
Nice.
Yeah, I guess we'll see what happens. You know, everyone's entitled to their opinion. And if they don't like playing with companions, I don't think there's anything I or Twitter can say to change your mind. But the reverse is true too. Like, people keep dogging on it, but I find it really refreshing when I hear people say like, hey, this has been pretty fun lately. At least things have changed up a bit.
Both things can be true.
Yeah.
It can be fun now and a bad idea long term, but...
Okay, so that's companion talk. We did it. We'll probably talk about them again next week and the week after and the week after that and the week after that. But right now we're going to take a quick break. And when we return, we have to eulogize a dear friend. You Googleize? We're going to the funeral.
Yeah.
So put on some black.
More of a wake.
Stay with us. So Wizards announced today that Planeswalker points are officially going away and DCI numbers will no longer be recognized or required to play in Magic events. And I guess from now on, you only need like your Wizards Arena account to register for events.
Yeah.
I don't think that means you have to play Arena, but as long as you have an account, you can use that account to register for events at like the LGS or GPs or whatever.
Yeah, they're using one unified sign-in for everything is their idea for that.
Yeah, your single sign-on.
Yep.
And we're recording this on Monday, the day the news was released. There has been a bit of a public reaction to some of the nuances for what they're doing with a lot of that historic data tied to our Planeswalker points.
What they're not doing with it.
Sure. Yeah, and the reason I'm bringing this up is only that, like, part of me thinks we might see a revision to their plan even by the time this episode comes out.
Yeah.
That would be unlike Wizards to roll things back in some way.
Part of me thinks that might be the case, but let's just take them at their face value today. With this DCI announcement, do either of you have reactions? David?
Can I give my reaction, please?
Yeah, you probably have the smallest DCI number.
Yes. So I got my DCI number in 1996 for being part of a tournament program that Wizards had called Arena. Believe it or not, they've been using that name forever. It was a book that they had. It was a tournament program that they had. My DCI number is 6 digits, not 5 digits, 6 digits.
It's 5.
So, yeah, it starts with a 5. And I feel sad about that fact. I understand why they're getting rid of it. I think that it's, Stan and I were talking about this in chat, and I think some people don't even realize that DCI numbers used to have ELO ratings attached to them. They gave people qualifications for things like high-level tournaments. I don't think they gave Pro Tour qualifications, but other types of tournaments based on your ELO rating attached to your DCI. They changed that. That's when they introduced Planeswalker points, where they made it more about, participation as opposed to ELO grinding, like you can still do on Magic Online if you want to. It's gone through a lot of evolutions, and I think it's gotten to a point where now when they decided they weren't going to hand out buys based on participation anymore in GPs, that they were just kind of like, why do we have this anymore? I think it's a good question. But, they had this tournament system in place for, I think the DCI was 1994, maybe. So it's been 26 years. It's sad to see it go. And, but I understand why. And so if the technology doesn't mean much to them, then I will consign 536-569 to the abyss and say, goodbye, old friend.
Yeah, I'm less concerned about the sort of way they want people to be identified changing, and more just how dismissive they were in the communication, honestly, about the historical record attached to it. Lee, your last name's escaping me. I apologize.
McLeod?
Yeah, Lee McLeod, I believe. So they had a really good take, which was, if the NBA suddenly changed the way they recorded historical stats, why would they also throw away all the old stats? And that's kind of effectively what Wizards is doing. They're just like, no, we're not going to save the data. No, it's not going to be rolled into your new ID. Deal with it, essentially. And it's just kind of, especially it captures every round of Magic I've played under my DCI number. And some people have 100 times the number of rounds played than I have over the years of their career. And it's just a little sad to see that historical record go. As much of a data guy as I am, seeing all that data just thrown away, and people immediately asking, well, how do I save this? How do I export this data? How do I put it somewhere where I can analyze it later, because I don't want it to go away? That's my gameplay history.
Yeah. I mean, again, I have records of an FNM I played in 1995 or 1996 that I can just look up and see my friends I played with in high school,
Yeah, I can look at who I played the most. My buddy in Chicago, who was my nemesis. I always ran into him at a local event, or the person I play the most at my LGS here, and I can see what our 1v1 matchup is over the last 2 years that I've lived here. And it's cool to have all that. And I know we'll probably have something like that under the new system, but why get rid of the old data? It can't be that hard. It's just matchups. It's just matchup data. You have professional data manipulation people, I hope.
Run the simulations. Never underestimate the complexity of match opponent win percentage rating. I still don't. I mean, I don't have a lot to say on the topic. I agree with both of you. It's sad that all the historical data is gone. It kind of makes sense if this data and technology is outdated. What are you going to do? I'm picking my battles, and this is not what I'm going to fight in. But it would be nice if it stuck around. Maybe in the future I'd want to revisit that stuff, but yeah, it is what it is.
Yeah, so export your data. There's a lot of ways to do so. From saving the HTML page to, Magic Stats, I think, is a web page that you just cut and paste all your stuff, and it keeps it for you.
I guess I'll have to get my DCI number tattoo covered up.
Well, that doesn't seem like a joke, Dave, so I'm not laughing.
All right, that wraps up this week's show. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. We went a little long, but it was fun. I think it was worth it. If you haven't yet, make sure you subscribe to our podcast so you get the latest episodes as soon as they come out. And if you use Apple Podcasts, please leave us a rating and review. If you'd like to submit a question to the podcast or pick our brain on something in Modern or Pioneer, you can tweet us at @thedivedown, all one word, or email thedivedown@gmail.com. If you'd like to support the show, you can join our Patreon. Find that at patreon.com/thedivedown for as low as $1 an episode. You can join us in the Slack channel. Less than the price of a cup of coffee. Also, shout out to ManaTraders for sponsoring The Dive Down. You can sign up for ManaTraders using promo code The Dive Down, all one word. Get 15% off your first 3 months of renting Magic Online cards. As always, special thanks to the bands Nowhere and Space Blood for letting us use their music. And until next week, get out there and crack more Bobbles.
Making your way in modern today takes everything you got. Getting a breakdown on PTQ sure would mean a lot.
Wouldn't you like to get by? Sometimes you want to go where everybody plays your game.
That's not the theme song, is it?
That is the theme song.
Man, I think Stan's just so off tune.
No, he's not.
I'm singing beautifully.
Rotating formats are so lame. Bum, bum, bum.
You want to be where you can see how the meta is going to change.
You want to be where everybody
Everybody
plays
plays
your
your
game. Dun-dun-dun-dun-dun.
This is definitely getting cut.
Oh, yeah. 100%.